Hello there. Um, I just had some thoughts on persistent storytelling and persistent narrative. And I was thinking about this because about a month ago or a couple months ago, I forget when, an article came out in Vanity Fair about Obi-Wan, and Star Wars in general, and kind of like the direction they were going to take Star Wars and Obi-Wan. Well, mostly just Star Wars, but there was some behind the scenes and info on Obi-Wan in general. But the point is, they're going forward. They were talking about how they're getting away, or they want to get away from the trilogies. These three-shot movies. That's it. That's the characters. That's the story we're telling, and then that's it. And they want to do something that's called persistent storytelling. And reading this, I'm like, well, I've heard of this before. This is the way I write, and this is the way I run tabletop RPGs and D&D. I tell persistent stories in a sandbox world that about characters and different factions and organizations, and their struggles and triumphs and deaths and great achievements. And it was just really interesting to me that going that they were going to start doing Star Wars that way, and I think that's a good idea. Now I understand some criticism of this is that they're just doing this because they want people to subscribe to Disney Plus, and that's absolutely a valid criticism. They want people to continuing subscribe to Disney Plus, and thus they'll tell these stories that take multiple seasons. But I think from a narrative perspective and a storytelling perspective, it's way more interesting to focus on one character or a group of characters over the course of a series, instead of just having one movie to do as much as possible and then stuff gets left out, as we see in the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, and the sequel trilogy. And I don't want to make this a Star Wars video, but I'm just kind of using that as a launchboard to talk about my narrative philosophy and my writing philosophy in general. But that got me thinking about an old conversation I used to have with a good friend of mine at my old job, who was also a DM, and we got to know each other by our mutual love of D&D. And he was talking about how he was trying to come up with a big bad evil guy. And if you know what that is, that's abbreviated BBEG in the D&D community, or tabletop RPG community. And what it is it's like kind of like the villain you throw at your players at the end of the campaign, right? So this would be like a Palpatine, or Darth Vader, right? And I think he was trying to make it a werewolf or something, and wanted my opinion on it. But talking to him about that, I realized that I don't run tabletop RPGs that way. I don't run D&D that way. Sure, I'll set up villains for the players to come and, you know, contact with and struggle against, or sometimes end up working with, depending on the party's alignment and preferences. But I don't, I mean, there's been epic conclusions, right? Like, there's story arcs in my games. It's not like I don't have story arcs. But what's interesting is I don't, like, okay, the campaign's gonna culminate into this, end of the world battle, which would be neat. But I think what's more interesting as me, as a writer and as a creator, it's to tell a story about, like, what happens after that battle. Let's talk about the characters daring and the leading up to it. But, the story doesn't end after that battle. Let's persistently engage in this world and explore it, right? And the same thing happened in, like, Star Wars, right? We had, the movies, they were great, but they lost a lot of stuff out. And there's a lot of side characters that could be explored, which got explored in the expanded universe. Which are great, is beloved, and then all the new canon Disney's doing is really great as well. Because let's admit it, most of the expanded universe of the old Star Wars, not a lot of it was great, but a lot of the new canon Disney stuff is great and really good. It's like, really well polished, because they're just not letting anybody write; they're actually thinking about it, and there's a story group, right? They have a story group that's in charge of the narrative, and I think that's a better way of telling stories in general. Now, don't get me wrong, I love sitting down for a movie and it just telling a one and done story, and that's it. There's no, cinematic universe or anything. But as a creator, as a as a writer, as a person that loves narratives and stories, I love the lore and learning about the world. So I do love the cinematic universes and, the detailed history of a world to really sink myself into and ground myself into. But that's just the way I run games. I don't run them linear. I don't really, railroad my players into, like, okay, now it's time to fight, the tentacle monster, because that's it, and you have to fight them. I give my players more choice. The tentacle monster is there and causing havoc, and if you want to do something about it, you can, but I'm not going to make you. But then let's explore a world where there is a ravaging tentacle monster. Don't know why I picked that. Why my brain went the tentacle monster, but that's what we went with. But that's just the way I run games, and I've never like ended a campaign. Sure, I've had, groups retire or characters end, but I've never been like, well, that's it. We're not doing anything more. Critical Role does a good job at this because they kind of culminate into the end of the story. But personally, I'm more for telling a persistent story in a world and exploring the characters, either the same characters or the descendants of characters, or a different group in a different part of the world. That's way more interesting to me, and I think D&D is really good for that. Well, it's good for both, linear storytelling and then non-linear storytelling. It just depends on what type of DM and creator you want to be. But it was just interesting that I see, that seems like the way we're going with narratives, right? Especially with streaming, which is why I wish they would do this more. Why with streaming we just do 1 hour and a half movies is perplexes me. It's like, we have streaming, you can pause it whenever you want, you can stop it. So why not tell these like huge, epic, complex stories that take multiple hours in a living, breathing, persistent world? We don't have to tell these just one and done stories, which are still good, don't get me wrong, but me as somebody that digests a lot of media, I prefer stories I can come back to, a world I can come back to and explore. That doesn't get tiring to me. And then you even see fantasy books doing this a lot. We have, of course, Lord of the Rings, but recently I think everything is like, has to have like a universe, and especially, like Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Chronicles or Stormlight Chronicles Archive. I can't remember which that is ever. I've only read the first book, so, and I'm reading Mistborn. But anyways, he's planning on writing like 10 more books, and it's like, holy crap, Brandon. And he's already written like seven books in his spare time. That's impressive, but I love that because he has this world in his head that he wants to explore and has to get these ideas out, right? And I love that. But also got me thinking about where else have I seen like persistent storytelling before. And a recent example that came to my head, funnily enough, was the WWE. The WWE has been doing persistent storytelling for a long time. Not always great, because the vast majority of wrestling is trash. Not all of it, but for the good portion, it's not always the best. But, you take one character and their career as they evolve. They're a villain, they're a hero, they're with the team, they're not with the team, they're, out for themselves. It's really great stuff if you follow like one character. And I find it really compelling and interesting to follow one character's career and see like, oh, are they a bad guy now? Are they with this team, with that team? I haven't watched WWE in a long time, but that's a really good lesson in character development and changing. It's like the character's still the same, it's still the same guy, but now he's just a villain. Oh, now he's a good guy. And that's really fun to play around with as a writer. And then another example of persistent world or storytelling is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. We follow the JoJo family and their struggles against various evil forces and Dio and the complications that come from that. But you start off with like Jonathan, and then you have Joseph, and then we get into the whole stand thing. That's introducing a new powers, new magic system. Some people think it's great, some people thought it was bad. I love the stand, but that just shows you like to evolve a story, you need to introduce new things, but it's still the same kind of idea with the same characters. And then you have your fans latch onto that. They see the characters and they're like, oh yeah, I really like this character and this story arc and that, but it's all still kind of the same story that builds off of each other. And I'm way more of a fan of that, and I'm way more of a writer that tends to go that way and the way I run my games. But yeah, this video really didn't come out of nowhere, just some thoughts I've had on like persistent storytelling. Like most of my videos are probably like rambling. I'm not really good at writing scripts, but yeah, give me your thoughts about that and what you think about persistent storytelling. I'll probably throw this up on YouTube and do a short TikTok about it as well. But yeah, well, I hope you had a good day, and thanks for watching.